Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. In one of my earlier videos, I spoke about how knights can be tricky and trappy. In this game I played today, I matched against an opponent where we both played well, and the game was balanced all the way into the endgame. We each had a knight, a rook, and the same number of pawns in a mostly symmetrical structure. To break the jam, I made 5 consecutive knight moves, the first of which Stockfish considered a straight-out mistake, and the second suboptimal. However, this series of moves clinched the victory. I hope you enjoy. So let's start having a look at the review. This is chess.com's algorithm, and I played okay. So 84.2% accuracy, somewhat more accurate than my opponent, though we both had a range of good moves, some accurate moves, but no blunders. And this is analyzed using Stockfish 12 to depth 30. And in the game, if you look at the graph, I'm only ever slightly ahead, mostly equal, and then towards the end game, I take the lead. Let's have a look at an analysis. I played white in this game, and so as usual with white, I try to play the Vienna, e4, e5, knight c3, and in this game, the opponent played knight f6. And in this position, I generally try to play the Vienna Gambit, f4. And Vienna Gambit basically is inviting the opponent to capture that pawn on f4, and in this case the opponent did so, and the immediate response, which is strong for white, is e5, and as we can see, about half a pawn ahead in this position. And the logic here is that the opponent knight on f6 doesn't have any good places to go after this position, and in fact is forced to retreat. And as we can see, retreating back to g8 is in fact the best move for black in this case. The opponent retreated to g8. I now play knight f3, which prevents a potential danger with queen to h4, which comes with check. And this is very good for white now, as for the cost of one pawn, I'm now ahead of in development, and this pawn can often be easily captured back in a few moves. Opponent plays knight e7, I play d4, bolstering the pawn on e5. Opponent immediately launches with d5, which I thought here for a while. Obviously, the chaotic automatic move is en passant. And in this case, I couldn't see anything wrong with en passant. So en passant it was. Opponent captures back with queen, which was what I predicted. But now I chose to immediately attack the queen, having come out with knight e4. And happily, the opponent immediately retreated back to d8, so they are basically not developed except for their knight, and also this pawn on f4 sort of out in the middle of nowhere. I capture that pawn with bishop capturing pawn to f4, and again I am much now ahead on development compared to black, though it has to be said black is in no way critically damaged after the opening. Opponent plays knight d5, and of course this wins tempo. As you would think, I'll be forced to, retreat the bishop. In this case, I thought that I was willing to give up that bishop for the opponent to further lose on development. So I actually opted to play queen d2, inviting that trade. And in fact, that is what happened. Stockfish would have preferred for me to retreat bishop back to d2, and with the opponent knight on d5, 2 squares in between, that bishop now does command all the squares potentially the knight could go. But again, I thought it would be better just to critically damage the opponent's development here. They now have no developed pieces, while I have quite a few pieces already developed. Opponent plays d6 against, again, they're trying to potentially, I suppose try to equalize development. Of the opportunity here is just simply to just straight out capture. However, in this case, I didn't want to do that. And so I played knight e5, blocking that attack on my queen. And obviously there is a potential immediate mate in one threat as well, though I didn't expect the opponent to fall for that. They castled, which was a good move. I now at this point thought I better get rid of that bishop, given that, that it's potentially staring at my queen. And I thought that was an okay transformation, though I think Stockfish would have preferred me not to do that. I now long castles, bringing my rook to the center with defense of that pawn. Now able to move that queen potentially out of the way. Opponent plays knight d7, and here again I thought for a while on what I should do. So obviously this is the threat, but it was defended. So here was an opportunity potentially just to move my queen maybe out of the way. However, I opted to develop bishop to c4, again placing more pressure on that potentially weak f7 pawn. Opponent didn't meet my expectations with just capturing the knight. Here I thought I'll move rook against to the center, potentially now another piece facing that pawn. Opponent brings out the bishop to e6, and here I thought it's probably safest to start liquidating pieces rather than potentially blundering a move and then losing a piece in an unfavorable series of exchanges. So I decided to just liquidate at this point. I couldn't quite see how far things could go forward, but I knew that risks were ahead. So bishop catches bishop, pawn captures bishop back. And here, my goal was attack the queen, inviting a queen trade. And a queen trade occurs. At this point, we're actually back to equality. So I lost some of the advantage from the opening, but I actually thought I was better. I thought my position was potentially easier to play. Opponent plays knight d5, a good move. I played rook e4, no pressuring the pawn. Opponent brings out their other rook also to the e file. I bring my other rook, now lining up for a battery. So potentially there's some power here. Opponent plays a very good move, rook to f2. So rooks on the second and third ranks are powerful. And if I carelessly capture that pawn, opponent captures back. And if I try to capture the rook back, then I'm in some trouble. So the opponent has some very, very potential powerful moves against me, because obviously I can't simply bring my rook back to my back rank to protect. So what to do? Brought my rook back to e2, inviting a rook trade, and I thought this rook trade was advantageous for me, and that's what Stockfish thinks as well. Opponent brings their rook to the f file, and here move my king off the back rank, removing that potential threat, and also 2 squares away from the knight, so controlling these 2 squares. So I was pretty happy with that position. Opponent obviously has to defend that pawn on e6. I wanted to block a potential opponent knight move to f4, so that's why I pushed that pawn forward. The opponent, the computer, Stockfish, thinks that some early moves here with my knight was better. I think opponent didn't know what to do, so I pushed h5. And at this point was my series of 5 consecutive knight moves. So what I saw was that I had some potential play moving into this square, and that at this point the only way to potentially win, I thought I was probably slightly ahead, but we're pretty equal. Pawns, 3 pawns, 3 pawns, 2 pawns, 2 pawns, each a pawn in the center. rook and rook, knight and knight, unless I started making some aggressive play here. I thought we would end up potentially in a draw, or if I blunder, I would lose. So I needed to make some aggressive moves. So I decided to do that with the knight, which tends to be good when there are quite a few pawns left on the board. So the first move, which Stockfish reckons is a straight out mistake, the opponent, moves their king to the h file. I think potentially thinking of maybe escorting these pawns, but this was a mistake. They needed to address, I think, what I was going to do with my knight, because this now allowed knight d7 with an attack on the rook. Now, logically, the rook has to move, but the next move for my knight is now a fork of two pawns. So there we go. Opponent tries to protect those set of pawns, given that now I've got two attackers on the e6 pawn, allowing me to capture a pawn. Opponent now tries to push ahead with their pawn play, rather than again focusing on my knight. And now the devastating move, knight g5 with check, forking the king and rook. So that rook is now lost in the next move. Opponent sees that and opts to resign. So 5 consecutive knight moves allowed me to win this game. So thank you to the opponent. GG. Knights can be particularly strong in the endgame when there are still a lot of pawns on the board. Their weakness compared to bishops is that they can't travel quickly across the board, and so their presence isn't felt when they are far away. However, their strength is that they can go to every square on the board, and their L-shaped moves can be difficult to see into the future after several moves. In the endgame, my opponent was forced to react to the aggressive moves by my knight, and inaccurate play resulted in a fork of 2 pawns and then the fatal fork between their rook and king. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.